Take me back. Take me back to Gary, Indiana. What was it like growing up there?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things here. I was born in Gary. My dad was in the military, so we were stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii for several years, and then North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, and then we moved back to Gary. So it was around second grade where I experienced Gary, Indiana, which was very different from military life, quite honestly. And so the biggest difference was that when we are in the military, it just felt like a big family, quite honestly. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that I've ever had an experience in terms of community like I had when we were part of the military. But Gary actually, it was very, very different. For me, there was culture shock, believe it or not. I was used to being the only African American in a classroom, to being in a classroom with nothing but African Americans. And my mom used to joke about this when I was younger, because I had asked her after like my first day of school when we were in Gary, I was like, where did all these black people come from? Like that was my first after coming back from school, uh, having moved back to Gary. So literally navigated two very different spaces, and predominantly white space, cultural norms there, to a predominantly black space with very different cultural norms. So for me, I actually struggled a good bit in Gary because, I mean, honestly, just because of my experiences prior to coming, I was listening to the Beach Boys. Like nobody in Gary was listening to the Beach Boys, right? So I couldn't even utter the words Beach Boys in Gary, and so I just
Well, the Jackson
had it.
5 came from Gary, didn't
Yeah,
they?
Michael Jackson, right? Like, so that was the cool thing. That was the in vogue thing. But it was really this wrestling of having actually formed an identity of self into this new notion of identity enshrouded in a culture of predominant Black themes that I didn't know were predominant Black themes until I moved to Gary. So, in navigating that season of my life, there was this real wrestling and tussling, so to speak, of like, who are you? Because people would say all the time, like, you're different, and I never really knew what that meant, and until I got a little bit older, and I just accepted the fact that I have experiences. I've seen a lot of places. I've seen a lot of diversity in ways that there were people that I grew up with where, maybe they didn't ever really leave Gary, or they didn't ever really leave the community that they were in, right? The block was their home and they never wanted to leave it. I'd already seen a lot and had traveled a lot because of my dad being in the military. And I just accepted at some point that, you know what? I'm not different. I'm just me. And I'm navigating a multitude of cultural norms and trying to figure out what I want to keep and what I want to discard in terms of like building my own identity of sorts. And
Hmm.
that was really the journey. Unfortunately, it was 90s when I was growing up. They were in middle school and high school. So we were kind of past the Michael Jackson era. We were into the Biggie Smalls and Tupac, East Coast, West Coast, like gang beef was real. Even to this day, like I'm wearing kind of like this burgundy shirt, whatever. But anything that was like a red color, growing up where I was from, was considered to be a vice lord. And if you wore blue, you were gangster disciple. And so, growing up, I was always incredibly cautious in Gary about what colors I wore. And even today, I still struggle with that because that actually meant something where I was from, and whether or not you can go to another like community or on the east side or the west side of town or whatever it may be, you always had to be mindful of these things. So that was so to kind of sum this up, a lot of my experiences in Gary felt very, very restrictive. Always loved arts, always loved writing, always loved photography, always loved poetry, always loved culture. But growing up during that time period, which was enshrouded in gang culture, I couldn't go to school and say, "Hey, do you guys want to start a photography club?"
You felt like you missed out a little bit.
I missed out on a lot, quite honestly, because in the season that I grew up, being a creative was not something that was respected. You would get picked on, you would get bullied, and all these other different things. And I oftentimes say when I speak to friends who are now, one of my good friends, she does costume design, and she's worked for Marvel with a number of the major Marvel projects. And even she wasn't able to really lean into and to showcase this thing. And she was always doing it on the side, so to speak. And then now when I speak to her, I was like, hey, I was like, were you always doing that? She was like, yeah, I was always doing this. But it's almost like we had to hide our talents to fit into this culture of hardness for safety and security purposes, not because individuals were hard or that they wanted to be hard, but you had to project a certain way in order to kind of protect yourself. And I think that sometimes that's what's missed out when we think about certain communities and certain cultures. It's not that any of these individuals are hard, it's that you just feel as you have to be in order to ensure your security and your safety. But I really did feel like I missed out on a lot, quite honestly. But the beauty now, though, is that we can't really change the past, but what we can do is move forward and to project to things that we hope that maybe a child in Gary or Flint, Michigan, or South Side of Chicago, or whatever it may be, is intellectually curious and has a passion for the arts and is a creative, potentially to project that, hey, it's okay for you to lean in those talents and abilities. And potentially these are some ways in which you can connect through social media to be empowered and to be supported and to be seen as you aspire for these great things that it is that you're wanting to do. So yeah, that in a nutshell, that's kind of my story.
That's a good lesson. Anybody can take away something from that. You know, even if you're not facing similar challenges, such as one that you grew up in. So, when did you realize becoming like a life coach, financial planner was your calling? Like, when did that journey begin from Gary to Athens?
Yeah, that's it. You know what? It was an evolution. I can't really say that I've had it figured out. I can't even say that I still have it figured out at this point in time. My biggest mantra in life is just honor the next step, right? So if I honor this step and I do my best work in this season, it will create new pathways. And then once those new pathways have opened, and I've considered what I like or what I dislike in the current season, then I'll choose my next best step, right? And that's kind of been my life's journey, honestly. I've worked as an accountant at a mid-sized CPA firm in Atlanta as an auditor. I didn't particularly enjoy that work because I just didn't enjoy the mess of accounting and working with firms because I didn't necessarily see the value of what I was doing. I knew that it was valuable, right? Because from a SEC perspective, maybe that may be a taboo conversation in the space of crypto, but there's a reason why we have the Securities Exchange Commission, right? And the reason why it was established to begin with, because a number of the things that we often see in crypto are not new things in terms of people trying to corner the market with tokenization and it going all to a particular group of individuals so that they can control the price and they can control the flow of something. That's not new. That's cornering the market. It was done in it was done in the 1900s, was done in the early the 2000s, so on and so forth. And so as we think about these things, none of the things that we're seeing are new. And so we have these regulations that kind of come about. And those regulations allow for us to kind of consider and think about what this process is as we navigate it. So if you're an accountant, right, you're basically, your work is to ensure, especially if it's a publicly traded company, that there is some legitimate entity that's reviewed these financials based on generally accepted accounting principles, so that if I'm making a determination to invest in a company, I know that someone went and audited their bank statements as of their end of year, December 31st or whatever it may be. The cash that's supposed to be there is cash. The accounts receivables that are there are legitimate accounts receivables, not receivables that have been sitting on the books for 200 days that the company's probably not going to get back. So now we got to go and write some of that off to kind of correct that. So there's a purpose for it. Like, that auditing process is important. But for me, because of where I came from, I always felt as if the work that I was doing, I wanted it to actually impact the communities that don't ever engage with a financial advisor, don't necessarily see the benefit of an auditor or and how this impacts a company because they're not investing in ways that they should. So I couldn't necessarily see the impact that I was having on everyday folks as opposed to the impact that I was having on helping to establish clear systems for a company or an organization and helping them do better. But I didn't feel like I was helping everybody do better, if that makes sense. And then from there, I worked in academia as an administrator. So I oversaw financial aid and registrar because I felt like, all right, I can use my skills from the accounting space and then help get closer to helping families in this regard. And so after about 7 years in that space, what I realized is that regardless of the institution you're working for, how you're serving that regard, it's still a business, right? And for that institution to be viable, you have to put butts in seats. And so there were a few moments where I had where we were admitting students who I thought were marginal at best that would have to take on a considerable amount of debt in their first year. And so we're not considering second year, third year, fourth year, and more than likely a fifth year.
Adds up.
Right. And then they're not just taking on debt, but their parents are also taking on debt through a parent plus loan of sorts. And if the parent can't qualify for that, then they'd have to get a cosigner because they don't have good credit. And now you can have child in debt, parent in debt, grandparent in debt. For a student who's marginal at best, and the likelihood of them actually finishing is very low. I just disagreed with that in the grand scheme of things. And so at that point, I was like, well, I'm not sure because I was turning students away and I couldn't tell my VP or my president that's what I was doing because they're thinking about it from a revenue perspective at that point. And I knew in that season, I was like, you know what, this isn't going to work long term because this isn't a good fit for me because I'm going to continue to turn students away and families away who can't see the big picture here. And I don't want them going into the level of debt that they're going to go into for maybe a degree choice that they're considering. And so I was like, well, let me work in this space in a way where potentially I can have more touch with families and communities before they ever get to that process so that they're more informed about how to navigate this effectively, which mitigates their debt, helps them consider degree choice and what that means in terms of financial trajectory. Not just my baby got a degree, they're going to make $100,000. No, the type of degree has an impact on the money that you're going to make in the market. And what are the market trends for your industry, right? Is it a strong trend? Is it a middling trend? Like, what does that look like? We have to be thinking about these things. So that's what kind of nudged me into pursuing my PhD in financial planning, generally speaking, was to actually be able to position where I could do research, where I could work directly with communities, and I could actually be on the ground level doing the work, hearing, researching, providing hopefully novel solutions to actually help move the needle as it relates to the financial well-being of households, generally speaking, and then also providing accurate context and an accurate lens to cultural norms and how cultural norms can actually have an impact on financial trajectory in a community that's often overlooked in the financial services space. Case in point, if we're talking about retirement, you'll often hear a financial advisor say it may, if as long as you're in reasonably good health, it may make sense to delay retirement and to optimize Social Security to the age of 70. Actually, if there's longevity in your family, that makes perfect sense. But if we actually look at trends in terms of longevity and quality of life, unfortunately, Caucasian men generally live on average to about 76, 77 years of age. Asian men around 78. Hispanic men around 73, 74. African-American men, 69 on average, right? So if I'm thinking about this from a financial planning lens, depending on the demographic that I'm working with, I have to take that into context in terms of longevity risk associated with the demographic. And I can't just say the average age of all people is X when it's considerably different. And then also thinking about a female counterpart who may be married to someone, there's additional longevity risk if African American men die at 69, but African American women live on average to 79, 80. So what does that gap look like if someone's, so we have to be thinking about that conceptually in the financial planning process, especially in the event that longevity and health aren't favorable factors within this client dynamic here. And we have to have these conversations to protect the client. So if we generalize everything in such a way, sometimes we miss out on nuance that actually needs to be considered in order to provide an optimal strategy. So these are the types of things that I look at in terms of thinking about, all right, for what do I know about this community? What do I know about this community? Cultural norms, religion. Maybe if I'm working with an Indian family and there's a gentleman who comes to me and is wanting to, and he's considering thinking about investing. But if you look at Indian culture, generally speaking, they don't invest a lot in the stock markets. They put a lot of their money in business and they kind of shy away from the stock market. So actually, if I'm working with this client, I need to understand the cultural norms of this individual in order to understand if they're being hesitant or reluctant to doing something so that I can understand where that's coming from. And then we can create a more effective strategy to get them to at least move the needle and start taking action. Those things matter. We can't generalize everybody and put everybody in the same bucket. Faith related, if somebody's a person of faith and they're tithing and you're saying, you know, it would be better if you put more of that tithe towards your investment so that you can retire with dignity, right? But if that's something that someone honors and it's something that's integral to them, I just can't tell them to stop tithing. I can't generalize everybody. So my work is more of a person-centered therapeutic method as it relates to let me understand the person that I'm working with and let me build from where they are to create the optimal financial strategy, and not from a perspective of transference in terms of this is what I think is best for you, because there is financial wealth, but there's wealth that is attributed to faith. There's wealth that's attributed to notions of a family. There's wealth that's attributed in so many different domains of individuals' lives. And you have to actually touch all those buckets. And it's not just a financial bucket. That's a conduit to something that's more important for that individual. So if you're an advisor, you make money by having assets under management, or you make money by having a fee that you charge, whatever it may be. So growing that, actually, you're incentivized to grow it because you can make more money as you grow it. But for our clients, that money in and of itself isn't just a dollar value. It's associated to something that's more inherent to the needs, the wants, the desires, maybe the fears of a particular individual that you're working with. So I like to be incredibly comprehensive in a way that I work with folks. And that's reflected in my work. It's reflected in my book. It's reflected in all facets of the way that I engage with the world around me. I know that
Yeah.
was a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that's amazing. Perfect opportunity to talk about the book, Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from the Inside Out. Listen, I read it. I loved it. Parts of the book made me happy, sad. I was a little upset sometimes, but ultimately I ended up getting value from it. And listen, not only from myself, but listen to these reviews. Listen, I don't even know if you've heard of this, but I'm so glad I ran across this book on TikTok. I love how he uses Black music to tell us a story of how and why we think of money the way we do. It opened my eyes and it lit a fire under me to get my husband and I's estate plans together. Both were completed yesterday. I highly recommend this book. It's a great read. I've had the pleasure of learning under Dr. Thomas in the past. I picked up his book knowing how great of an educator he is. Fortunately, not only is this book educational, but Dr. Thomas's kind aurora pours out of these pages. Pick up this book if you want to learn more about your own financial story or gain a new perspective on others. Listen, all those reviews, but mine fall right in line with those. So what does it mean to hear such an emotional reaction to your work?
Yeah, I initially I struggled with it because I even struggled with releasing the book because it was so vulnerable, quite honestly. And I really leaned into a lot of vulnerabilities that I hadn't really processed, especially like stories about my sister and her passing and kind of like revisiting that and all that jazz. Stories about some of the struggles that we had growing up. We talked about like identity and what that means in Black culture. I had a story in there where it was right before President Barack Obama got elected the first time, and we're at this event or this party or whatever it may be. And because I present differently, oftentimes in certain spaces, there was this air of suspicion about me. It was like, did you even vote for Barack Obama? You get what I'm saying? It was feel
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm the only person being called out in a room in terms of like who I voted for just because I carried myself. And that's no different than the experiences that I had when I was growing up in Gary, Indiana. I'm just not a loud person, quite honestly, and I don't feel like I have to prove myself to anybody. But I can understand where that comes from and where the spirit of that comes from. And I kind of touch on that in the book. So I don't just kind of leave it there in terms of it's just a me thing, but why might these individuals be thinking and feeling the way that they feel? That's enshrouded in what would be considered a Black experience. So the reason for even like there were a number of people who was like, hey, I love the book, but do you really want to call it Black financial culture? And I was like, absolutely. And the reason why that is because when I was growing up, one of the things that I always felt during that time that was lacking was feeling seen, right? We didn't, the only financial person we really had access to was maybe an insurance person who would come and knock on your door, right? Not financial advisor, not like these individuals that you see in society who are the movers and shakers of the world, whatever. Maybe that just wasn't my experience. And so I wanted to write something as almost like a love letter, so to speak, to Black financial culture, which says that I see and I understand a number of the concerns and social ills that you've had to deal with because I've had to deal with them as well. And that's why I had to be vulnerable in this book. And that's why I didn't put PhD on it either, or that I was Dr. Michael Thomas. Because my experiences have been is that if I lead with that in certain spaces, people immediately discount my experiences. And they don't know where I come from. They just assume that I don't come from where they come from, and it creates an initial roadblock. So I was very intentional about not including my credentials and all these other different things that I have, because I wanted people to come at it without a bias that I've experienced in a way that I navigate spaces. I've had people even tell me, like, if you didn't tell us that this is where you came, I wouldn't have believed that you come from exactly where I come from. You experience exactly what I experienced. And so what I've learned is to build bridges, you got to leave all that stuff aside and then create a space where somebody can engage with something authentically without any preconceived notions. And that's what I wanted to do, because if I can't nudge your behavior in any direction, if I don't empathize with you first, and then we move in a process of a compassionate layering of potential things for you to consider without me telling you what to do. Because this book isn't telling Black financial culture, you need to pull up your pants or you need to do X, Y, and Z or this and that or the other. Like, no, it's not my job to parent someone. But this notion of financial freedom actually for me has nothing to do with someone having a nest egg of $1 million or having a home that appreciates in value. It's about you knowing fundamentally that you have a choice. And then at the end of the day, in knowing that you have a choice and that your choices matter, it's up to you to decide what's going to be best for you or for your family. I'll give you some things that you can consider to aid you along that process. But real freedom is actually having choice. And you're exercising choice, ultimately, for me, is what Black financial culture is. Not, on the other hand, you engaging in some cultural pattern or some notion of Black identity pattern that is suboptimal, that you don't know that you're living out, and you're doing it only because this is all you've ever known. You're not actually exercising choice here. So the whole purpose of this book was to lead with empathy and to deliver with compassion so that individuals could actually hear. And if you hear me and you allow yourself to hear me, then I know I'm going to pull on the heartstrings. If I could pull on your heartstrings and this emotional tone, I can start to nudge you to start to get into what we would call contemplative state. in the trans-theoretical model of change, which was very intentional. So I'm actually using theory in this book, even though you don't actually see it in the writing, to get you to get to contemplation. And once you get to contemplation, it's up to you to make the decision, right? And that's freedom. Whether you choose to optimize your financial journey or you don't, at least you choose. And then I say it at the very end of the book. I was like, it's your money. You do whatever that you want to do with it. Just own it, quite honestly. And I feel that people change better. People change by having the space to be able to make mistakes, but to also know that they can grow from those mistakes. So I give people the space in the book to experience however they want to experience, not telling you how to live your life or these are the 3 things that you should do or the 5 things that you should do or whatever it may be. Really what I'm going for is heart change. And if I can capture your heart in this book, then I know that there's going to be a fertile ground for the seeds that I've sown. When they manifest themselves, if they manifest themselves, I can't control that. But I do know that once they do, it's going to be a sustainable progression of financial wellness and well-being, because I'm not trying to hack anything. I'm just trying to get you to lean into you and to be the best version of you in terms of dealing with your trauma, dealing with money scripts, dealing with areas where you feel as if you failed yourself, so that you engage in self-forgiveness in order to move forward. Because I believe that forgiveness is a wealth creation strategy, whether it's forgiveness of others or forgiveness of self, that allows us to move forward. And once individuals are able to do that, I feel like the sky's the limit. And it just puts you in a better position to be curious and to have confidence and to want to take the next step and know that it's okay if you're not perfect in doing any of this, because none of us are. We just learn from it and we just continue to progress one step at a time. And I think that's the beauty of the book. But I wanted individuals within Black community to actually feel seen by a book that spoke to cultural things in a book that you just wouldn't see anywhere else in a financial book of sorts. But then all of the other things that are layered into it are universal in nature. And my hope too is that someone who is not African American reads the book and says, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." Or, "Oh, we do the same thing in our household." Or, "Oh, so the whole point of this was that maybe through this notion of Black culture, it's not a divisive way of thinking about this. My hope is that people come into it and say, oh, I never knew this about." And I feel closer and more connected and have a deeper understanding in the way that I engage with people who may be different from me. And so, or have different experiences, or we have shared experiences, right? Oh, like, this isn't just Black culture. This is all people. We all struggle with this. But if we never address it head on and have the conversations, we never get to that space of connection. And so my hope is that whoever reads it at the end of the day, that they feel actually warmth and connection through reading of the book, regardless of their background.
Oh wow, that's an amazing answer. Actually, I wanted to start off by saying, for me personally, I read the book, and just knowing that the self-worth and the belief is the framework or the idea behind this book that you have here, it makes it more powerful, because I see myself in your journey from when you were younger, growing up, how you didn't value money because you didn't value maybe yourself as much as you do now,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a progression, it's a journey. And you start off the book by saying money isn't the main thing, which isn't something that you would normally hear from a financial planner or a coach or anything like that. So why do you think that belief or self-worth is so vital to your financial well-being?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So to finish that phrase off, it's money isn't the main thing, you are, right? And because and that's where this building wealth from the inside out matters so much. It's because money could be squandered. Money comes and goes. I've seen individuals receive windfalls, significant windfalls, and basically blow that money in a matter of 2 years. And so we never see this full circle, right? Because I work in a space, I have behind the scenes conversations that are obviously private and things of that nature that, you don't share amongst clients or amongst individuals who are not in those sessions. Is that even if even if I have an inheritance that I want to give to my children or my life insurance and things of that nature, if I didn't prioritize their wholeness while they were growing up, if I've hurt them, if there's no trust, if there's no love and there's no care in that relationship, and this child is wounded and something happens to me and they get a windfall, what do you think they're going to do with that money? They're going to self-soothe with that money. Because so much of our society believes that money is the end all be all, right? And my perspective is slightly different. And this actually comes from my faith. Ecclesiastes 7, 11, and 12 basically states that money and wisdom can get you almost anything in life, but wisdom is the only thing that can save your life. And I think that we get it wrong. We think that money is the only thing that can save our lives, but it's not. It's having equal measure of wisdom with the amount of money that we have, and what you find oftentimes when there's when it's off kilter, so to speak, and there's more money and there's lack of wisdom, then that money basically becomes a burden to that individual. You see it with wealthy individuals. You see it with middle-class individuals, upper middle-class families, things of that nature. Not all, but when we aren't dealing with the matters of the heart, and we think that money is just going to come in and be the saving grace and is going to make everything perfect. No, people with money still have problems, right? And so, but because we don't see this and understand that there are limitations with money, it's easy to say, well, if I had it, things will be better. It will be better in some ways, but it can also create a lot of anxiety. It can create a lot of pressure. There's so many different things that come about in this process that we never talk about full circle. So, but if I'm dealing with a healed person and a whole person who comes into money, they're going to treat it very differently than someone who is hurting, or someone who's dealing with trauma, or someone who's dealing with a whole host of things. So I wanted to kind of step away from that paradigm of just thinking about this from a money perspective, but let's deal with these underlying things that we never talk about really, that are just as impactful in the ability to acquire wealth, but more specifically, sustain that wealth. And I wanted to have these full circle conversations without being preachy, but talking about matters of the heart, matters of relationship, matters of community, matters of forgiveness, and all these different things that are so incredibly integral in this money conversation. And we have to be just as intentional in these areas of our lives as we are with the acquiring of wealth.
Yeah, that leads into your that one chapter of yours, secure in the bag. You must secure the hearts before you secure the
Yep.
bag, right?
Yep.
Where you begin to make those connections with money. So you have to understand the whys and the hows, like you said, and to achieve true financial well-being, I guess you have to understand your hows and whys. So
Yeah,
how do you think?
it's both.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, the secure the heart and the bag. See, I appreciate you. You actually read the book, and I can
Yeah, of
tell
course.
you actually read the book.
Yeah, of course.
There are some people who are trying to play around and act like, yeah, so I read it, and then they only have like your context here. No, but the secure the bag and the heart line comes from, like, uh, there were these hashtags where people talk about securing a bag or bag secured. But again, because I do this work, and not just from a financial standpoint of it, but from a therapeutic standpoint of it as well. There's actually an entire space and industry called financial therapy, as well as financial coaching and financial counseling. And I navigate all those spaces. And what people don't see, they don't see the full circle moments of these things, is that just because someone has secured the bag doesn't mean that that's the end of their financial journey. Right? There's all these other emotional things that can actually rise up in terms of having the money. That could be trauma-based and whole sort of things, as I mentioned earlier. You could have survivor's remorse. You can feel guilt over navigating a process because you're invited into spaces and you're making money that your family has never seen before, and you just feel incredibly overwhelmed by it, and can even feel as if, why am I worthy of this? And not actually honor the moment and the prestige that comes with it, and then actually bring people along. These are real things that people deal with in sessions. And we never talk about this because it is a heart matter, and just as much as it is a money matter. And if we don't consider both, you can get the bag, but you won't keep it. And as an advisor or someone who works in a space, it's my job not only to help people accumulate wealth or to learn about the process of doing it, but also now once I climb the mountain, how do I get off? There's a study that came out not too long ago that said most of the people who have mountain climbing incidences is when they're getting off the mountain, not going up. Why? Because we spend all of our planning getting up the mountain. And we never consider, oh, I have to have a plan on how do I get down the mountain. And that's exactly where we find ourselves with money. Oh, I got the bag, but now how do I transition down off the mountain now after I've climbed it? And we don't have a plan for that. Emotionally, relationally, even if you have a spouse, like how your spouse may engage with you, if you all come into money, can be very different. You knew this person when you all didn't have money, but now you have money and this person is morphed into somebody else because they have heart matters and issues that they have to deal with. And we can't just assume that just because we have the money, these things are going to manifest themselves. How our family engages with us now, because guess what? Now that there's money, it's actually arising something inside of them that's causing for their behaviors and actions to change. It's not a you thing, and it's not a they're acting funny or weird. It's just that they have heart issues and matters that they have not resolved, that now that bringing money into this equation has now awakened those things. And so now we start to think about the broader cascading effect of this. And you see this with athletes and entertainers and musicians and things of that
Yeah.
nature. It's like all these people around me are changing. No, the presence of money and resources has awakened something in them that they have not resolved. So I've done working with athletes and a whole host of different individuals. And one of the things that we do is that we talk about having family dynamic conversations. I'm not just trying to ensure that the athlete is financially literate. We need to make sure that the entire ecosystem around them understands as well and help them address their heart issues, right? Just as much as the athlete has to address the things that they have to address as well. Because now we start to see that this money journey isn't just something where we're an island of ourselves. It actually impacts our entire ecosystem, right? And so we have to address all of it to ensure that our wealth is sustainable for all parties involved. And everybody understands that we all have to engage in healing in terms of navigating this process. But we never talk about it full circle. Because again, so much of the work that we do is behind closed doors, it's anonymous, and there's privacy. So you never get this element of it, but I see it all the time, right? So I wanted to do something that spoke to those things without being too technical, without being research laden, even though it's all backed by research. But that was packaged in a way that anybody can read it, anybody can understand it, and can kind of see the significance of this full picture view of the entirety of the process and not just one element.
Yeah, I love how it's a multi-tiered approach. So in your book, you tie giving, the act of giving, to joy, community, and service, and it doesn't have to be monetary. So, so how can I, as a reader, build a mindset of like abundance and service, even when I don't have any money to give?
Absolutely.
I don't have any money to give you. So what can I do?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, because again, that whole notion of building wealth from the inside out, right, is that what do I innately already have that I can provide that has value, whether or not I think about things entrepreneurially. So someone who's an entrepreneur is going to think, oh, I made a cupcake and everybody seems to like them. I'm going to make as many of these and just try to sell as many of these as I possibly can, right? And this could have been a labor of love initially, right? In terms of just taking it somewhere and doing X, Y, and Z, but their mindset is naturally entrepreneurial in terms of thinking, well, if people really love these, maybe I can sell these and create value, right? But you have to find it first. So let's say that you're someone who played high school or college basketball, and you were really, really good with handling. And you just say that, you know what, one of the ways that I'm going to give is that I'm going to go to the park in my neighborhood. And I'm just going to go hang out for a few hours each day. And if there's some kids who come, I'll go shoot hoops with them. And I'll say, hey, if you all want to work on your handling or whatever it may be, I'll spend some time out here and I'll work on some handling with you. That's giving. And the beauty in it is that it's giving in a way that oftentimes money can't provide for us. Because not only does it produce dopamine, in terms of I've actually achieved something from the day. It also produces something called oxytocin, which is this warmth and connection feeling in terms of I've done something good, right? And if all I did was just take an inherent talent that I have or a gift that I have, set some time just to be in spaces where I could acknowledge that gift and sow into the life of someone else, what it does is it produces dopamine and oxytocin for the people that you serve. It produces dopamine and oxytocin for you. And you actually leave that feeling really, really good, really, really productive. And then what happens as a cascading effect here is that that one instance will actually propel someone to take action in other domains of their lives, right? That may lead to another opportunity just by showing up and serving others. One of the things that I mentioned is that sometimes when you, let's say for here, the local YMCA, if they were doing a trash pickup in my community, one of the things that I acknowledge in the book is that maybe you go and assist with the trash pickup. If you live in that community, go serve with the YMCA as they do the trash pickup. Why would you do that? You would do that because usually the individuals who are going to be there for the YMCA are going to be the individuals who serve on the board of the YMCA. Random people just don't serve on boards, right? So at our YMCA, we have the athletic director of the UGA football team, Josh Brooks. We have a whole host of other people. So it's loaded. So if you go and you serve, you're actually more than likely going to be serving alongside other people that you don't know who have power and social capital just by showing up and doing something good. And if you do it well and you engage, guess what? Just like with the basketball scenario, you create a sense of you create dopamine and you establish oxytocin. And if you're establishing oxytocin with someone like Josh Brooks and you all kick it off and have a conversation, and let's say you all leave it there and you come back and you serve again and he's there and now he knows you by your first name and you all are talking. And then maybe the third time you're like, hey, are you aware of any opportunities at the University of Georgia I'm just looking for a job anywhere? Just like, let me look into it. And you get a phone call the next day and now you have an opportunity in a job, right? So oftentimes if we actually, I firmly believe this, served people serve people. It's not going to be 100% of the time, right? But if you engage in service, it will open up opportunities for you. And so some people oftentimes engage in a passive approach and don't do anything and expect for somebody just to come and call them to something. That's just not how this works. You actually have to be visible. You have to be present. You have to have a spirit of service. And if you do that, you're going to meet the right people because you're going to build social capital. If you build social capital with the right people, then you have access to their social capital because they can make a phone call. And by your showing up and serving on a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon or whatever it may be when other people aren't doing it, you're actually going to have access to these people in a way that other people don't. Because when you see someone like Josh Brooks, there's a crowd of people around him. But when you do this on a Saturday when nobody wants to show up and it's just a one-on-one, you actually get to know the person. They actually get to know you. And so if we step back and say that, you know what, my abundance is going to come from what I give first. It's a different mindset. And if I give, and I give consistently, and I do it in a way where I have a good spirit and I give my best effort, that is going to inherently lead to opportunity. So my call there in that chapter is to encourage people to just kind of show up where they are. Show up where you are. And I guarantee you, and I promise you, I see it over and over again, that it will lead to opportunities. But just sending a resume through Indeed, where you get thousands of those a day, is not going to be the same as actually having a one-on-one conversation over multiple weeks with someone who's a stakeholder, who has power, it just needs to make a call. It's not even, it doesn't even compare. And we navigate a space where actually having relationships is more powerful than just having a resume. And so I would just implore individuals to lean into service, and just know that those efforts being present and showing up will lead to something that is going to be beneficial for you in your wealth creation journey. And not just from an employment opportunity, but also from the insight and knowledge that you get. Like when I show up to things like this and people ask me about, oh, what should I do with my investments? Or what should I consider? Or I was thinking about X, Y, and Z. What do you know about crypto and blockchain? Guess what? Because you showed up, you didn't know that you were going to meet me. And now we're having this conversation about your financial situation. I've not only told you what to consider, I've also connected you to resources, asked you to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm going to connect you to X, Y, and Z that I know that can do this for you for free, right? It's kind of like, what are we talking about? So showing up matters. And sometimes I think that when people get down on themselves and they struggle with showing up, it can cause for them to engage in an avoidance type mindset and to become very insular and to isolate instead of congregate. But if you're showing up in spaces where all people are asking for you to do is to serve someone else, we can all do that. And we can all do that extraordinarily well. And it doesn't take a lot of skill. You just need to be present, have a good attitude, and actually be there in service of others. And when you find yourself in those spaces, I think that magic happens, quite honestly.
Wow. Yeah. There is a little bit of magic in serving, especially when you don't have anything else to give but your time
Yep.
or your presence.
And this is the thing, and you're giving you. And I don't think that there is anything more valuable than saying that, you know what, the only thing that I have to give is me.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yep.
Let's go to wealth creation. All right.
Yeah.
So like what advice would you give someone like me, the reader, who feels like overwhelmed by their financial situation and doesn't know where to start? Like what's the first step, you think?
Yeah, there are a number of different things. And so this is going to be the typical financial planner answer. It depends on the individual. Everybody's situation is very, very different. You can have some people who actually have the resources and the means, but are still balking at the process because they don't feel as if they're where they need to be. And I've worked with a number of them, $100,000 in a bank, not in a high yield savings account, not earning any interest to whatever it may be, no credit card debt, no car debt, can have home paid off or whatever it may. It can be a lot of different things, but they're just incredibly reluctant to engage with the market and to kind of grow their position. They're just being passive in what they currently have established. There can be individuals who just don't have much at all and then are considering, all right, where do I even begin? And so I think one of the biggest things is understanding that comparison is a thief of joy. And if it's a thief of joy, it's a thief of gradual progression. Because if you're comparing where you are to where other people are in the season of life that you're navigating, it's very, very highly that you're not even going to want to run the race to begin with. I liken it to someone who's ever on track. There's nothing more deflating than if you're running and you know you're about to gas out and somebody just comes and passes you and they just keep going. You just know you're not going to be able to catch up, right? And what happens, if anybody's ever run a race, something will shut off in your brain. It has shut you down, right? So if we're constantly navigating a world where we're getting all these images about how all these people are so much further ahead of me, and I've already wasted so much time, now I'm engaging in self-shame, and I start to isolate instead of congregate. And when that happens, I'm like, well, this is as good as it gets. And now I'm not even going to start or even begin the process to begin with. So I'm not even thinking about opportunities to build wealth now because of the season that I'm in, because I've compared myself to where other people are, and I don't even feel as if I can catch up. So the biggest thing that I would start with is stop comparing yourself to other people. You don't understand context. You don't understand circumstances. You don't understand how they have what they have. You don't understand what sacrifices they may have made to have what they have. Even if they received an inheritance, you don't know what sacrifices maybe their parents had to make and where they came from to have what they have in order to be able to establish X, Y, and Z. So there's so much that gets lost in translation. And because there is that gap of knowledge, we typically fill it with negativity. It's very rare that people fill gaps with positivity. It's just like if your significant other called you on the phone and you don't answer, and 30 minutes or 45 minutes goes by and you usually answer, they're not going to say, oh, maybe they're busy, right? Maybe they're doing something productive and they'll call me back, right? No, it's like, where were you? Why didn't you call me? Like, is there something wrong? We fill gaps with negativity and not positivity. So if we're comparing our financial journey to other people and there's a gap, how do you think I'm going to fill it? And if I fill it with negativity, then that ultimately impacts me cognitively, psychologically, and emotionally, which triggers cortisol production, stress. And then now that I have stress over money,
That was another theme I want to hit on in your book called Legacy, Tiara. You write
yeah,
that every legacy requires someone to run the first leg of the race. For
yeah,
you, how has the tragedy of losing your sister shaped your perspective on legacy?
yeah. A couple of things. I I don't we talk about legacy, but I don't I where it impacted me the most is that our legacy oftentimes won't have our name tethered to it. It'll just be the spirit and essence of who we are that lives forever. And at a certain point, I used to think that legacy was like, what can I build? What can I get my name on? Let me climb the corporate ladder and let me do all these different things. And that changed over the years. And especially changed with my sister. But one of the first instances of that was when I was working in the accounting space. And I would see all these individuals, they would work 10 or 12 years to become partner. Many of them having experienced divorce, many of them giving up, time with their children, to just work busy seasons and just to go through the grind of it and become partner. And then they do it and then they get there. And then guess what? A year or two later, they're kind of like, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm going to do something different. And I saw that happening over and over and over again in that space. You gave up 10 or 12 years of your life. You gave up time with your family. You gave up time with your spouse to climb the corporate ladder and to do all these other different things, only to say that once you got there, I'm good. So that struck me. And then with my sister, when she passed away, uh, I received so many communications about how she was there for individuals in their time of need. She co-signed for individuals who were establishing businesses, extending her credit. I would do that. I'm sorry. But that was my sister. She was actually co-signing for people to actually start their businesses. She was throwing birthday parties for children where their parents weren't in the best space, whether it's through drugs or alcoholism or whatever it may be. She would still make sure that those children had a birthday party, even though that their parent couldn't show up for them. And when you start to hear and like giving money and giving her time and all these other different things, and and what really hit me was is that the spirit of her is gonna be the thing that lives forever. And that's not gonna die. Even though she's not physically here, the spirit of her is still here, living through people modeling, trying to do kind of what she did because of the way that she served them, oftentimes inconveniently. And I lead that with that in the book, love even when it's inconvenient. And that was a theme that I spoke on during my sister's funeral. And so what I was thinking was that, well, you don't leave a legacy unless you live the legacy. So what am I living? What am I doing today? What is the spirit of me that's proliferating now? That's your legacy. Your legacy isn't something that happens after you're gone. Your legacy is something that you live. And if you've established a legacy, you will know if you've done something that lives beyond you. Well, you wouldn't know necessarily, but the people around you would actually see how you manifest in the world after you're gone. But you can't leave it unless you live it. So let's stop worrying about what we leave and let's more so focus on what we live. And I think that that was a powerful thing for me to actually recognize that in my sister's life in terms of, you know what, I'm not going to wait until there's a perfect moment to serve. I'm not going to wait until there's a perfect moment to give. I'm not going to wait until there's a perfect moment to spend time with my kids or with my significant other or whatever it may be, because there is no perfect moment. We have to create the space for it. But I need to be intentional about living the thing that I want to leave. So what am I living? What am I living? And for men more specifically, I often hear this with a lot of gentlemen that I've served, is that I'm willing to die for my family. I would argue, what are you willing to live for your family? And that's a conversation I have often when I speak with men. What are you willing to live for? Because your family doesn't want you to just not be here. We just talked about earlier statistics about men and longevity and things of that nature. You're actually going to be of more value to your family if you're here, maybe depending on your insurance policy, but hey, that's either here or there, right? Um, but what are you willing to live for, right? And what does that look like? And how can I start executing on that day after day and being very intentional about that? So with my sister's passing, um, with very little means, she served and gave in ways that I think exceed someone who would give $100,000 gift to an organization. Because that $100,000 in an organization is going to be budgeted, it's going to be spent, and it is going to be gone. But the spirit of what my sister did lived on through the hundreds of people who were there at her funeral, which was a very beautiful thing. And every single last one of them, there was a story about how she served them, how she loved them, and she did it even though it was an inconvenience to herself. She was living a legacy and not worried about leaving a legacy. And so that's what impacted me the most. And so I'm more intentional about what I live as opposed to what I leave. And that's what came from that.
Wow, that's powerful. Her legacy, just hearing her stories from you and reading about her, I know that her legacy left behind in your everyday life is profound and impactful. So my condolences to you. And
I'm going to lean into adaptive responses that I have with money. And then oftentimes that adaptive response for many people is just avoidance or self-soothing in terms of doing things. So if I've compared myself, I have stress. The stress is causing me to lead into an adaptive response around money. That adaptive response isn't to say that, oh, let me go make more contributions to my Roth IRA. No, it's going to be, let me go retail therapy, right? Let me go buy the video game. Let me go do X, Y, and Z, because that at least makes me feel good temporarily without having a long-term return. And you find people in this cycle, right? The stimulus cue cycle, so to speak, or the cue and then a stimulus and a response cycle that doesn't lead to an optimal strategy. It just leads to temporary dopamine hits that make me feel good, but I'm not actually getting anywhere. But if we stopped comparing ourselves to other people, triggering cortisol response, and actually being able to self-regulate and to use our prefrontal cortex to actually think about, all right, this is where I am. This is where I want to be. And let me consider how I might start the process of getting there without thinking that I'm operating at a deficit. And instead, let me just establish my baseline and accept my baseline with grace and compassion. My past self didn't have the capacity, the resources, the know-how, the connections to have made better decisions at that point in time. I can forgive myself for that. That's okay. I didn't know better. Now that I know better, I have more information, more resources, more people who can help me and serve me and who want to help me and serve me and who love me and want to see the best for me, that now I have exposure to these things. What can I do now without bounding myself to what others have done and where they are? And then actually take a great deal of pride in me just moving from my baseline and seeing where I've come from, as opposed to seeing how far I have yet to go from where someone else already is. Even the way that I did that with my hands, you can clearly see it. If I'm trying to reach X, I'm constantly operating out of a deficit. But if I start from baseline and I'm just thinking about where I've grown from baseline, I change the perspective. I'm the person on top always growing from this space. But if I'm thinking about the gap between me and others, I'm constantly trying to catch up with this person here. And if this person here has invested their money and it's compounding, I don't care how hard you work, You're not catching up.
You're
That's
not,
not how
yeah,
that
not going to
works.
catch up.
And then it becomes deflating. So my biggest thing with the wealth creation journey, just to get to the point here, stop comparing yourself. If you have children, multiple children, you don't have the same level of discretionary income that someone has who may be earning the same money as you, who doesn't have children. They may be able to invest more. It
Well,
doesn't mean that you're behind. But
how can someone balance saving for emergencies while investing?
yeah,
Because you probably want to have a balance of two.
no,
So
absolutely.
your
Actually,
fund, what do you call the fund? The get to fund for
yeah, I call it the get
emergencies.
to fund. Look at
Yeah,
you. Look at you.
you do a lot of label switching. You would do the
I,
hurt people to the
yeah,
serve people. Yeah, I see a lot of
absolutely.
label switching you do. So the get to
Yeah,
fund,
yeah,
how do people balance that saving and investing? Because people are degens, they want to
yeah,
invest.
absolutely. And so I actually posted something on LinkedIn a while ago, not LinkedIn, on Twitter a while ago. I said the best way to protect your crypto investment is by actually having an emergency fund. Because if you don't have an emergency fund and something comes up, more than likely, either on a high interest credit card, or if you can't borrow money from a friend or family member to cover something, you're probably going to have to sell off your position. And if you have to sell off your position before a bull run and you've done all the right things leading up to the bull run, but something happens at the most inopportune time, then you can actually miss this wave that you waited 3.5 years or 4 years. So for me, I don't look at emergency fund and investing as separate things. I look at them as actually one of the same, one in the same. You have to have some short-term liquidity in the event that something comes up. Why? And I don't want to label it as an emergency because emergency can be triggering for some. If you come from a traumatic background where everything was an emergency, it seemed like your parents were always constantly putting on fire, right? Um, and and they weren't always in the best mood, and you just knew, like, when mom or dad was in that particular situation, like, it could trigger so many different things when we think about that. So the reason we call it a get to fund is that by having that money set aside, you still get to do the things that you're planning to do. So if I have a position and I have my crypto position, let's say I have some book, let's say that I have some World Mobile token, I have ADA, some Link, or whatever it may be. The way that I protect that position at this point isn't necessarily adding to the position. Say I've already accumulated my position. If I want to create, right, a moat around that, maybe the more optimal thing to do at this point in time is say that, you know what, I'm just going to make sure that I have at least $1,000 to $2,000 in a high yield savings account. And once I've established that point, then I may consider maybe adding to my position at that point, or whatever it may be, not chasing pumps or things of that nature, because I'm trying to protect my position now to be able to see the fullness of it during the run. So it really is not it's really kind of like, it's during this season, I'm going to do more of this. During this season, I'm going to do more of this. So for instance, we're at the end of the year. We're going into tax filing season. There are probably going to be some individuals here who are listening to this that may receive a tax refund. Instead of degenning that tax refund into the market, right? Because we don't know how the market is going to move and how it's going to run. We hope that it's going to run in a way that we hope for, but maybe it may be ideal to take some of that money, earmark it as, this is my protecting my crypto investment money, label it explicitly, because now you're seeing it as a whole and not as two separate things. And oftentimes when we think about emergency funds and investing, we think about them as separate things when they're actually a part of the same strategy, right? In order to protect my investments, I need to have a layer down at the bottom that in the event that something comes up, I don't have to actually ever consider selling off any of my positions too soon because I wasn't prepared for an unexpected expense. So if someone has already set a position, I would actually encourage them that maybe the more significant downside risk is experiencing a unexpected financial expense, and then maybe just setting some money aside. I would even argue $1,000 to $2,000 at most, just to have that there, and then have fun with riding out the rest of the bull market and see where that goes. So I completely get it. But I think the best thing here is to look at them as one and the same and not as completely separate things. And I think that having that paradigm makes it easier for someone to say that, oh, By having this money here, I'm basically protecting my bags. Well, that's exactly what you're doing. And so I think that having that frame, I think hopefully will help. At least have $1,000 set aside in the event that something comes up so that you're never tempted to sell off your positions sooner than you may want to.
Well, yeah, you don't want to sell off your positions sooner than you
Exactly.
want
You
to.
don't.
Who
You
wants to get
don't.
liquidated? Nobody does. So you mentioned it, crypto, blockchain. You're an author in the Web3 space. You've published a book with Book.io. How do you, how can authors and individuals begin to explore this space meaningfully? Is it getting a Twitter and scanning for tickers on Deck Screener, or how can they engage?
Yeah, I would argue that one of the best ways to engage in this space before you ever invest anything is to actually understand what the space is. So I started exploring crypto in earnest in 2019 um, and blockchain technology, and it took me about almost 8 months to get really comfortable with what this actually is and me being able to conceptualize a valuable project from a project that's not valuable or may not have any potential value, and then understanding something about markets, uh, understanding something about community, platform, understanding something about uh, leadership. What's their background? What are their experiences? Do they have any prior experience where they've actually built something that has a sustainable business model? Because it's not just, oh, I build something and I'm going to make money. Like, you're creating a business. And so do they have a business state of mind? Do they understand tax efficiency? Do they understand hiring a team and how to scale, how to do that gradually, not burning through all of their capital, right? Like, there are all these little nuances that come into just understanding whether or not if somebody's building, do they have the right foundation even to begin to have a chance at success? Because even in the non-crypto world, the vast majority of businesses that are established, only 33% are still around after about 10 years. If you know anything about the venture capital space, they don't just say that, oh, there's this one project, we're going to pull all this money, invest in this one. No, they're investing in 10 or 12 projects because they know that maybe two or three actually make it. So for me, because I navigate this space, I know how to evaluate financials, I know how to consider and think about intrinsic value. It just took me some time to step back and consider, well, how do I then take that way of thinking to begin to consider how this may work in this particular space. And then once I did that, I started understanding about blockchain, about security, about decentralization, and all these other different things. I started to say, okay, I can see some legitimacy here. So from there, let me start looking at projects that are building and whether or not there's teams taking ownership of things that are going wrong with the project, whether projects are actually having audits done of their code, which was a really, really big thing for me, quite honestly. I don't know how you could just produce something and just push it out without having a legitimate audit of the base layer of the code, because that's really where you provide protection in the space. So companies that were kind of ticking the marks for me, that are saying that we're legitimate, we're real, we're not trying to rug people, we're actually trying to build something that's going to be sustainable and have some long-term viability and growth, were the types of projects that I were attracted to. Then once I did that, I was like, all right, where are these projects? They're on Twitter. So I needed to be on Twitter. Where else are they? They're on Discord. Oh, I don't know anything about Discord. Well, let me go learn something about Discord. Let me join these communities. They're on Reddit. Let me go join those communities. And then let me just sit back and just learn from all the people who are asking questions. Because if somebody just dropped a bag on a project, they're going to be asking tough questions, especially if their wife doesn't know. Then they just took X words. They're asking serious questions. So let me just sit back and just study what they're asking and seeing how the leadership is responding to it, or the people who are monitoring the chats are responding to it, to see whether or not these things actually make business sense or actually legitimate sense in the way that they're answering it. And then so for me, it was just kind of navigating that process and then gradually saying that, okay, I'm going to, on my wealth position, I only have roughly about 5% of my wealth in blockchain technology crypto. Um, and thinking about increasing that a little bit more because I have a little bit more comfort level with the risk now, especially long term. And, but for me, it was like, all right, let me take an amount that I'm perfectly okay with. They're having some volatility with that, uh, and taking some positions and gradually moving in those positions over time for projects that I feel that are legitimate projects that I know that can fail. I'm perfectly okay with that. It's no different than any company that I've invested in traditional finance space. Company can go bankrupt. It's a part of the investing process. So there's always going to be that. And then, so I've just started thinking about it more like I would think about creating a diversified portfolio, thinking about blockchain technology and crypto as just its own asset class with a slightly higher risk profile than other alternative assets, or maybe kind of comparable to it, and just now providing some exposure to that to my portfolio. So I've thought about this in a very academic financial planner type of way. And then from there, I've just, again, it's just more of a passive approach. I buy, hold, uh, not looking to trade. I want to optimize long-term capital gains and things of that nature if I do sell off any positions. I would love to see more ETFs for crypto. Why? Because I can put those into a Roth IRA, pay taxes on them now. And then the idea is that, well, if Bitcoin grows or Ethereum grows or Cardano grows over years and years and years, I want those to be in a Roth, or I want those to be right in a traditional brokerage account, because I would pay long-term capital gains taxes and things of that nature if I can on those. And I can do that now with crypto if I have my own ownership of it. So that would be the only reason why I would carry ETFs in that regard. It's just not to pay taxes off into the future on something that has high growth opportunity. So for me, that's kind of been the process of this, but it has been me understanding computer sciences, right? Like, what in the world does half of this stuff mean? What's a Merkle tree? What's cryptography? What's SHA-256? Like, what does this mean? But then as I started to explore it, what I started to realize is that, oh, this is no different than how security is done on my Google email account. Blockchain in and of itself is a decentralized server. We already use servers that are centralized to capture data and all these different things that kind of be the ledger, even though it can be manipulated and changed and attacked. So once I started thinking about it, it's like, oh, blockchain technology is everything that we already do in a different way. And then once I saw it in that lens, it didn't look like it was this alien thing that was coming into the world and trying to disrupt everything that we've already done. It's actually everything that we're currently doing, and I would argue in many instances better. So that helped me to narrow the gap in terms of my understanding and get comfortable with it. And then since then, I just sit back and I listen. I do more listening than anything else. I listen. I'm on Twitter all the time, listening to spaces from the speakers on projects and things of that nature. And it just has to make good business sense to me in order to invest in a project. No different than anything else that I would potentially invest in. But that's kind of been my journey. And I just gradually add on after taking maybe about 3 to 6 months to actually understand something. I don't feel like you miss opportunities. It's just that when you take on an opportunity, you have to be willing to ride it out. But I can't ride something out that I don't understand. So I understand first before I invest, even if that takes me 6 months or 9 months to do it.
That's fine too. All right, one last question here. If there's one message, one truth that you hope every single reader takes away after reading your book for the rest of their lives, what would it be? And I'll give you my answer at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. If there was one message from the book, so I have a copy of my hard copy version of the book that I pulled out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the hard copy. So what you'll see here is that the heart here is a black heart, and there are these gold flakes that are around this heart. And in where you see the gold lines on a heart was where there were cracks initially. Okay. And so this actually comes from the Japanese art form of kintsugi, which is called golden repair. And the reason why I love that idea so much, it's because in from that paradigm, you don't hide areas of your life that were broken. you repair them with a gold lacquered or a silver lacquered, and you highlight those things because it provides more character, more texture, more richness to the experience of, let's say, a boss or something like that that you would have. And the idea here is that you now are a more beautiful object because of having endured and experienced this process than you were when you didn't have any blemishes. And I think that we spend so much of our lives hiding, isolating ourselves because of our shortcomings, because of mistakes that we've made in the past, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people. And we can't heal what we don't reveal. And actually, in revealing these things about ourselves in safe spaces, obviously, and healing those things, nor do we have to hide them because we've become the best version of ourselves because of those things. And it's okay to reveal those things. And in doing so, you'll uplift other people. You'll help other people feel as if it's okay for them to be seen so that they can actually grow, so they can actually engage in a process of vulnerability in order to be able to grow. So if there's anything from my book that I would love for people to take away, is this notion that perfection is not required. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. I still make mistakes financially and otherwise. But I'll recognize them. I'll grow from them, and I won't hide from those mistakes because it's because of those things that I have become who I am today. Right. And if I didn't have those things, I don't think that I would be here having this conversation right now. So I think that we can find power in our past. I think that we can find power in our trauma. I think that we can find power in so many different things that maybe aim to disrupt our lives and maybe to keep us held down. But those very things and obstacles are also opportunities. So my hope here is that in reading this book, you begin to see that even in the midst of your obstacle, you can actually approach it from a paradigm that there also too has to be an opportunity. And I want to lean into the opportunity of this season that I'm navigating. And if we can do that, I have every reason to believe that no matter what you navigate throughout life, the volatility, the disappointments, the loss, because we all experience it, that you're still going to be able to grow, you're going to be able to find purpose, and you're going to be able to execute. And in executing consistently over time, sustainably be working towards this long-term vision or goal that you have. That would be my hope for people with the book.
Yeah, I mean that perfectly encapsulates probably everything that I felt while at the end of the reading the book. Key is progress, not perfection, right? It's
Yep,
having that
absolutely.
self-awareness and knowing where you stand without judgment or shame, being able to stand there open and knowing who you are. So hows and whys, right? So
Absolutely. Housing wise.
okay, so yeah, listen, this has been an incredible conversation. All
No, I
right.
appreciate you, brother.
All right, before we wrap up, listen, can you share what future projects you're working on, like what initiatives, and if you have any shout outs or anything else you want to leave the audience with, that's fine too.
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you for creating a space. I think that this is definitely been needed to connect people to real people who are passionate about book.io and what it represents for creators, and then also end users to be able to own their stuff. And I think that is such a huge paradigm because as Ben and Josh would say, a lot of people don't know that they don't even own the stuff that they have digitally. They just don't know.
We're going to
So
tell
it's
them
changing
about
that.
it.
All right. So we need to tell them about it. So I think that that's a beautiful thing. And I appreciate the work that they're doing and everything that the team is doing there. And just to reaffirm to them, I'm here for the long haul. So I'm excited about what they're doing and passionate about it. Um, and as it relates to like future projects and things of that nature, I'm working on two right now. There's one that I'm working on is going to be called the Book of Modems, which is money and wisdom. So modem is a combination of two that comes from Ecclesiastes that I talked about earlier. Money and wisdom can get you almost anything in life, but wisdom is the only thing that can save your life. So these are just basically me re-envisioning a lot of blogs that I've written. If I would think about it, it's more like meditations, so to speak, but for money. It's kind of like the idea there. Absolutely. That will be the next project that I'm working on. I've been waiting for I haven't been wanting to like pester the book.io team. about trying to get a listing before the author portal, simply because I feel like they've given so much. And sometimes on Discord, I think people lose sight on how much that the book team is actually given. And just because we're not seeing a price action that we want to see right now is not indicative of the value that they're producing. So I want to be very clear about that point. And I think that sometimes folks have to step back and say, is the book team creating something for the long term? And if you're not here for the long term, then I just don't know what to tell you, because they're actually building a legitimate platform. So that's a big thing. So I want to speak to the audience in that regard. But I've always been intentional about how many people I can bring to book.io, and not just trying to publish something so that I could leverage the book.io community. Incredibly supportive. I appreciate the support of the book.io community. But I also feel as authors, we have to understand that if you actually follow anybody who's publishing a book, they'll take about a year to actually market the book before it's ever been published. A year. So for individuals who are wanting to do this, just like myself, I would strongly encourage you, if you're wanting to publish on the platform or just publish in general, you can already publish your book on Amazon if you want to do that, in terms of kind of like navigating that process. But I would encourage you to go ahead and start now in terms of the branding and marketing of what's coming and what you're working on, and constantly referencing book.io and those messages, maybe giving excerpts from your book or whatever it may be. Because we have so many people in queue, there is no reason why I
Exactly.
shouldn't see on Twitter
Mhm.
thousands of marketing messages about a book that someone is wanting to release, and showing why their book should be released on the platform. And so that, to me, is going to provide incredible value for all of the creators on the platform. And so I would strongly encourage that, because that's what I'm going to be doing with my next coming books, is that I'm going to be rolling them out gradually over time, trying to bring as many people as I possibly can into the book community before I ever release the book, so that they're ready to go, that they understand what the process is, and that they can mint and do all these amazing things. So for me, it's not just releasing the book, it's also saying that I'm also adding value to book.io by bringing a community. And if everybody who wants to be an author on this platform just spends the next year, quite honestly, by building their community of would-be buyers, that creates a larger pool for everybody who is wanting to publish a book on a platform. And instead of waiting for book.io to do all the driving on that end, we should actually be bringing our communities to the platform. And so the next two projects I'm working on are going to be very much so centered on exposing people to blockchain technology through book.io. And hopefully, when people own my book, it's going to be more people who are not a part of the traditional book.io community, and people who've come into it to learn more about what this technology is, and then potentially how they can leverage and use it at some point in time for their project. So working on two projects, the Book of Modems, and then the other project that I'm working on, and this is not going to be released probably until maybe the latter part of 2025, 2026, is Perfection Not Required. So those are the two projects: Book of Modems and Perfection Not Required, book on money as well.
Okay,
So
awesome.
there you
Looking
have it.
forward to both of them. All right. Well,
I appreciate
thank
you,
you
man.
again for sharing your time, your stories, your wisdom, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And follow Dr. Thomas on X. All your socials will be linked in the show notes there. And until next time, own your stuff, people.